And we welcome you and everyone to another edition of the Lennox on Baseball live stream podcast. Hope you're enjoying your Wednesday so far. Absolutely thrilled to welcome in two terrific writers and guys I've gotten to know. I actually came into their, I guess you could say, adopted hometown. Dominic Amore, who a longtime writer for the Hartford Courant, John Altavilla, has written in the past for both the New Haven Register, covered baseball, covered Super Bowls. We'll get into a lot of different topics with John and Dominic here. Gentlemen, we'll start with John. Thanks so much for taking a couple of minutes with us. Give us an idea how are things going in the optimistic view of the world right now?
Well, first of all, let me let you know that Dominic and I are not cardboard cutouts of sports writers sitting in the stands. We are, in fact, live human beings. My life has gotten a lot better since baseball started up last weekend. I really, really miss it. I know how much it means to me in general, but when you go without it for 4 months, without the company of it, without the day-to-day rhythm, without the syncopation of a season, you really come to realize how much you miss it. So I've been thoroughly enjoying watching every minute of baseball that I can since it started up last Thursday.
And we'll get more into that. Dom, give us an idea how things on your end.
Well, I'm just happy to have some sports back, to have some uptick in sports activity. I've been in kind of off-season mode with my regular, beat, which is UConn men's basketball. I've been in off-season mode anyway, but just not with nothing going on. Finding things to write about has just been a chore, and although I've been able to do it, but I'm just happy to have something happening in sports that we can look at and reflect on, whether it's MLB, whether it's the WNBA, whether it's UConn recruiting or other off-season news, and Knicks hiring a Connecticut guy perhaps to coach them, Tom Thibodeau. So I'm just happy to have some sports activity back, because I think it's necessary for our country and our culture to have that, to take us away from the things that we're kind of tired of talking about.
The one question I've led off with the last couple of weeks as I've gotten this going is, sort of my For Love of the Game segment. And at some point I'll put a sponsor on it maybe. But Dom, we'll start with you. Give us an idea when baseball sort of piqued your interest in that, that not infatuation, but just, an interest in the game.
Well, it kind of started, when I was a real young kid. I didn't have any interest in sports at all. I didn't, I would always be like on the side of the schoolyard when the kids were playing kickball. And one day my father was home from work early, and he came to pick me up, and he saw that, and he said, "Why aren't you playing with the kids?" And I said, "Oh, I don't like sports." I was about 9. He goes, "You don't like sports? How?" So he started taking me to like Yale football games, and the next thing you know, I was watching everything, with him, whether it was the golf tournaments, the Pro Bowlers Tour, Wide World of Sports. We watched every sport, and so that got me into sports. And then the following spring was 1972. I can remember watching the Yankees on opening day, and it was a night game. It was an opening day at night because of a rainout, and they beat the Brewers 2-0. And it was that was really the first game I watched, and then I just became a big Yankee. My father was a big Joe DiMaggio Yankee fan. My brother was 10 years older, Mickey Mantle Yankee fan, and I just kind of fell into that and became a Bobby Mercer Yankee fan. And that's kind of where it kind of stemmed from, and ultimately I gravitated to baseball beyond the other sports. And we would start to go to Old Timers Day every year. We'd go to opening day every year, and ultimately it became. I used to look at the press box at Yankee Stadium from the grandstand and say, "Wow, what a great job that must be to go to every game, every game." And I was fortunate enough about 40 years later to get that job.
John, take it away.
Never wanted to do anything else in my life except be a sports writer. It's worked out just perfectly. My experience goes back to my grandfather, an Italian immigrant. My father was always working. My grandfather lived with us, and he's the one that took me in the backyard and taught me how to play baseball, and took me to my first baseball game ever, which was Game 3 of the 1964 World Series between the Yankees and the Cardinals, the day Mickey Mantle broke Babe Ruth's record for most home runs in World Series history. And even though the Yankees were the team to love in those days, we gravitated towards the Mets. And my grandfather and I would go to 2 or 3 Mets games every year as I was growing up, and that continued into the '70s. And but like I said, I was always keeping scrapbooks and always focused in on baseball. And from the time I was 8, 9 years old, when Dom was hanging out on the side of the school buildings, I was focused on actually becoming a sports writer and being able to do that and write about the games because I wasn't very athletic in general. And like Dom said, it's been just a marvelous career. It's been just a very fulfilling, successful, happy experience to know that you ended up in your life doing exactly what it was you always wanted to do. I would never trade it for anything.
That's awesome. Sort of a two-parter in that sense of, that stuff that you collected as a kid. Did you hold on to it? And is there something, from your childhood and, as you were growing, even early on in your professional career that, might have been a memento that you somehow lost track of?
I kept everything. I was a big baseball card collector, Steve, and I still have my baseball cards. Probably my earliest card was maybe 1962. I still have them in my basement, separated by team, wrapped up in elastic bands. They're not curated like you would if you were going to sell them or be a card dealer. They're just a way a kid would collect baseball cards, and they've always been one of my prized possessions. And my grandfather would go to spring training every year and bring home programs from Washington Senators games at Pompano Beach, and I have them down there too. So I'm very into baseball history, and I don't think I'll ever give up those cards. My son's not that interested in them, but I'm lucky I'm happy I collected them. I'm happy I still have them, and it means the world to me.
It's on our kitchen table upstairs. It's not really a kitchen table. It's just, that table in your house that collects everything. And
Yeah.
I probably, and as you said, my sons are the same way. I've bought baseball cards over the years, and there's probably about 75 or so that have just been sitting on that table. Present day cards, nothing. Mine are tucked away. I can't throw them out.
Right.
There's nothing, the value to me has always been, to look at them, to look at the front of the card, to look at the back of the card, from that sense. But they're just sitting there, and I have no place to put them right now.
Yeah, you can't throw them out. You can't bear it apart with them. I mean, my mother used to, when I would collect cards, she would throw out the older cards when I got the newer cards. So if I would get Mickey Mantle card in 1967, she would take my Mantle 66 card and throw it out, so I would only have the new cards left. Little did she know what she was doing to me at that time. But yeah, baseball cards are so cool. I'm sorry that our generation doesn't get to experience them the way we did, going to the delicatessen and buying packs and taking the gum out of the pack, and the whole deal that we got to enjoy so much when we were younger.
Dom, how about you?
Well, I was never a big collector of memorabilia. I mean, I have some programs of games I went to in the '70s. I have some, I still have them around. But the only piece of memorabilia I have, I'll try to show it to you. It's behind me here. John, I know, has seen this many times.
Ooh, audio visual. Okay, Dom.
Yeah, a little visual.
All
But you can see it there. It's it's the piece of Yankee Stadium that I worked at. You see it there, but next to the radiator. I can't get out of the way here, but it's just a piece of the press box when they tore down the stadium in '08. I asked them if I could have it, and they took a chainsaw to that part of the counter where I worked with the Hartford Courant plate on it, and someone took a picture of the stadium from that seat. So I have kind of a reminder of my years covering the Yankees right there, where I worked and the view I had, and that's about the only really important piece of memorabilia that I've kept on baseball. But
the only piece of memorabilia you and I both share. We both got to sit in that seat during our time of our careers, and yeah, it is. I've seen it in Dom's house. It's really cool. Yeah, it's like having the old polo grounds.
Yeah, we both covered perfect games from that seat, actually.
Yeah, we did.
What do you miss the most about the old stadium?
Mostly, I just kind of miss the mom and pop hominess of it. You walked in. I mean, first of all, you parked in the players' lot if you had a press pass, and you walked in the same gate. You had the same guy waving, the guy George waving you in, and if you weren't a regular, he like treated you like absolute garbage. If you were a regular, then you'd walk in, see the same guy at the press gate. You'd go downstairs and you'd see, Mary and then Fran in the dining room, and then the same guy at the clubhouse entrance. It was just the same people in the same places, and it was very homey. It was small. It was homey, and in the clubhouse, the players had nowhere to hide. They had to be out there. So you spent those 3 hours before the game in the clubhouse. It was productive. Today it's so big. It's like a convention center. There are different people in different places all the time. It's like walking into maybe Disney World. They all kind of give you the forced hello and welcome, but they're not the really hard-nosed Bronx guys that Bronx people that were there before. And it's more of a corporate experience today. So I kind of miss that hominess, that mom and pop business feel that both Yankee Stadium and Shea Stadium had. There's a completely different set of people at Shea Stadium, but they were the same people all the time. And they were from Queens, and they talked like they were from Queens. And if they didn't know you, they looked at you like, "What are you doing here?" If they knew you, "Hey, how you doing?" So I kind of miss that, the people and the hominess feel of both New York stadiums. They're much more corporate, much more convention center feel to it today.
Dom, tell Steve about Bob Shepard's table in the press room where he used to eat lunch and breakfast every morning, and what a thrill it was to be invited to sit and eat with him.
Well, you weren't invited to sit and eat with him. He didn't want you anywhere near there. But he, well, he was always the first one. He'd arrive
Right.
he would arrive by with a driver, because he was obviously an elderly man, and he was always the first one there. And the minute they opened and started serving food, he was there, and he would sit in the back corner, and he was the only guy. Usually, was the only guy there. After a while, his driver might sit there with him, because his driver would have to have a credential, and maybe a couple of other people. And I remember one day he was approaching his 50th anniversary of doing games, and I was doing a story on him, so I wanted to talk to him. And so I got there early, and I figured, well, I'll talk to him when when he first gets there. So he sits down at the table, and I walked over, sat down, and said, "Mr. Shepard, you're approaching your anniversary. I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes, if that's okay." And he says, "Mr. Amore, I prefer not to be interviewed while I eat. Stop by my booth between the first and second inning. I will give you all the time you need." And that was Bob Shepard in the dining room. You had to leave him alone.
Yeah,
That's outstanding.
That's a piece of Yankee history right there. Seeing him every morning when you walk into the press room, sitting at his table, having his breakfast. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was always determined to beat the traffic on the way out. So when there was 2 outs in the ninth inning,
Yep.
he would actually be up, have his coat on, ready to go, outside of his booth, ready to sprint out to be the first one in the elevator, down to his car, waiting outside, and go. So he wasn't caught in the crush of fans. And so if the guy got a hit, he would kind of curse and have to run back and announce the next guy. And then he would go right back out and be essentially in position to sprint out of the stadium.
So did you guys cover the 2000 the Subway World Series?
Dom did.
Yeah.
Dom did.
You were
Okay.
there.
So
You did some of that, no? Didn't you do some of that?
No,
Jay?
I was at I went as a fan, but I didn't cover anything.
You were doing the Giants at that
Okay.
time.
Right.
So in that 2000 year, I escaped Staten Island in that winter to go back to Wilmington, Delaware. But I was working for the Staten Island Yankees, so I asked Rick Cerrone and Jason Zillo, "Hey, can I come up and help out in the playoffs and do anything?" And so I became sort of a runner from the auxiliary press box in right field. Would be downstairs post game. Would be upstairs a little bit, was told, almost yelled at there was a meeting with Mr. Steinbrenner next door, so stop running the copy machine for a brief time. But one of the guys I worked with, and, just all guys, probably interns at FAN or wherever, one guy told me, he said, "Do yourself a favor, go up eighth inning, at that point, you're kind of, you could get lost for a little while. You didn't have walkie talkies. And, if you sat and watched the game for a little while or stood somewhere else, you could do that. So they're like, go upstairs, position yourself outside of Mr. Shepard's booth. And Dom, exactly what you were just talking about is exactly what I was going to share, where, the elevator was ready. He's out in the hallway. You did a great impersonation there. I'm not going to do that. But he went out in the hallway. The next guy got a hit. So he gave that all shucks, went back in, did the announcing of the next hitter. And then last out's recorded. It might have been a ground ball or a fly ball, but it was a routine out. And I turned around. He's gone. He was absolutely, he was gone.
He ran track for St. John's in like 1920. And so he even when he was in his 90s, his knees were good, and he would sprint out to beat the crush to the elevator. Because if he got caught, if you got caught in that elevator, there was a lot of people in 2 elevators that were very slow. Yeah. So slow, in fact, that George Steinbrenner, when he got frustrated enough, would kick the kid out, running it, and take over and run it himself.
John, your thoughts? Dom shared there, and we went in a couple different directions, and that's what this is exactly what I want each time I have guests on. Share again. Something that is there one specific, or are there a couple certain things that you miss from the old ballpark in the Bronx?
Well, it's a place where history was made. There's no question about it. I mean, when you covered the Yankees, you felt like you were at the top of your profession. It's an incredible feeling to be in the press box at Yankee Stadium and watching everything. And Dom and I, as Dom alluded to before, we had the good fortune to each cover a perfect game. Dom got to cover David Wells's perfect game, and I was at David Cohn's perfect game. And that's still the number one memory, the top story I ever wrote in my entire career. But I don't know if you remember, Steve, but the day that David Cohn pitched his perfect game, it was Yogi Berra Day at Yankee Stadium. So Yogi Berra was there, and Don Larson were there. So after David Cohn pitches his no-hitter, they trot Yogi Berra and Don Larson into the press room, and they're recounting their memories from the great World Series perfect game. And David Cohn is sitting there, and it seemed like the entire Yankee history was coalescing in this one room, and you got to listen to all these great, players talking and reminiscing and talking about the perfect game, and David Cohn talking about his excitement. It was a remarkable day. And Dom got to experience the Yankees really in their prime, the days of Bernie Williams and Paul O'Neill and those great Yankee teams that won all their championships. But for me, it was more an event here, an event there that really stuck out in my mind. But and we both got to cover the perfect games because the person who was covering the team at the time decided to take a day off. So because he decided to take days off, we got to fill in for him, and we both got perfect games out of the equation. So, how do you when you think about your career in terms of events, how do you top being able to cover a perfect game at Yankee Stadium? It was just an incredible experience.
Has it resonated with you guys at all when say the last 5-10 years, maybe even go back further, of the athletes, in particular baseball players that you've covered, don't know the history and almost are indifferent to it?
Well, I think that's true, Steve, but I think it was also true 20 years ago and 30 years ago and 40 years ago. Because when you think about it, the history of baseball, the history of sports is for people like us who weren't athletes necessarily, and gravitated toward this profession and this side of it. Because I can remember when I was in high school, the kids who played baseball knew the least about it, except for playing it. They didn't know, they didn't know anything about Mickey Mantle, or I was the one who was always reading about 1910 and the glory of their times and all that stuff. So that's really nothing new, and it's nothing that really should surprise anybody, because people who play a sport are immersed in playing it and not necessarily reading about the history of it. So that's to me kind of just human nature. I'm always surprised and delighted when you do run across a modern player or contemporary player who does know about the past. That's
like Alex Rodriguez.
David Cohn is one of those guys.
Yeah, Alex Rodriguez too has a really good knowledge of baseball history.
What's it like for you watching Alex Rodriguez contribute and play the role that he does now as an analyst, but possibility of being part of an ownership group here? John, we'll start with you on that one.
During my time covering the Yankees, I always found Alex to be kind of a hot and cold kind of guy. If he wanted to talk to the media, if he wanted to make himself present, he would. But oftentimes he was one of the players that would hide in the back rooms and not come out and discuss games with us unless he really felt it was to his advantage to come out and talk. But frankly, he's surprised me as he's gone into retirement with his knowledge of the game and how much he seems to know. But he's had such a fortunate life. He's bounced back from just about every adversity that he's encountered in his career with the drug use and all the dumb things that he did when he was young and a player. With his ex-wives and all the problems he would get into New York that Page 6 in the New York Post would cover. Rodriguez has always to come out ahead of things, and now he's married to J-Lo, and he's got J-Lo, and he's in the process of putting together this syndicate to buy the Mets. But as a Mets fan, I hope his team doesn't end up with the Mets on just a personal. I would not want Alex Rodriguez to be the face of my franchise if that time would come. But he's a very smart guy, Steve. He's really a very well-spoken, smart guy. He can be very charismatic when he wants to, but there's always that element of him that there's a lot of people that think he's kind of a shyster, kind of a opportunistic kind of guy who's really a bit of a fraud. But he does know his stuff and does know a way to communicate.
Yeah, I have a hard time picturing him in that role. I mean, I know he's a smart guy and he's very interested in finance and business, and he's picked Warren Buffett's brain a lot over the years. But yeah, I always found him to be somewhat almost pathologically disingenuous. That he's always got to say what he thinks you want to hear. If you look at what he just said about how there should be a salary cap after all those years of being in the union and profiting more than any player in history by there not being a salary cap. It just kind of shows you that he just has. I don't know that anybody really believes him or trusts him, and he would be a very trustworthy person. He's a smart guy. If he surrounds himself with smart people, he could certainly be successful in just about anything he chooses to do. But I often wonder if this is just not a reaction to Derek Jeter owning and running a team. That if Derek Jeter does it, he has to do it. So that seems to be a part of his personality and a pattern. So he might be the right guy to own the Mets, but for the wrong reasons, so to speak. So I don't know. I feel like he was born to do what he does, which is be on TV and be an analyst. I think he's great at that, especially in the postseason in the studio. He's very good at that. And I don't know. I wonder why he would want to subject himself to more and more and more criticism, which is all there's going to be if he runs a franchise.
Interesting thing about Dom would back this up. Jeter always thought Rodriguez was kind of a goofball. He never really respected him. I think he always tolerated him more than respected him as a person. He always distanced himself from Rodriguez, in terms of policy when the Yankees were talking about things. He just kind of would look at Rodriguez and go, what is it with this guy? And Dom makes a good point. I wouldn't be surprised if A-Rod just said, well, look at me, I can be an owner too, just to show Jeter that he was on his same level.
Did you ever possibly think that, we're talking Jeter, A-Rod, post-career having, part ownership. We've seen Magic Johnson do it as well. Patrick Mahomes in the last 24 hours, part owner now of the Kansas City Royals as a 24-year-old reigning Super Bowl MVP. This isn't down the road after the retired. This is present day with a lot of career in front of him.
I can't believe it. That they would engage someone that young to have that position. I was really caught by surprise by that. It's something you expect of an athlete at the end of his career, a veteran athlete, but not someone so young, so relatively inexperienced in pro sports. I thought it was a little bit of an overreaction. I'm still kind of shocked Mahomes has an ownership stake in the team.
Well, you remember when the Yankees signed Dave Winfield, and someone asked Joe DiMaggio how much he would command if he were playing at that time, and DiMaggio said, "Well, based on what guys today get for the numbers they have, I would go up to Steinbrenner and say, George, you and I are about to become partners, right?" You remember? Pretty famous story. Well, today players actually make enough money where they can become partners. I mean, Mahomes just signed what, a $400 million deal, so that's a lot of glue. And if they want to invest it that way, it's why not? Although I wonder sometimes if owning a team is fine for the fun of owning a team. I don't know if as an investment, owning a piece of it is such a great thing, but they always value. They always go up in value. And 10 years from now, the Royals might be sold for $2 or $3 billion, and maybe that stake he has will be twofold or threefold as well. So, I mean, if he's going to be running the franchise, I'd have my misgivings. But he just wants. That's where he's got a lot of money, and that's where he wants to put it. More power to him.
Yeah, you're right about the franchise escalating in value, and what this investment from Mahomes right now will probably pay off by the time his career, probably dwarf what he's making in salary.
I kind of, not that Magic Johnson is a test case, but I almost feel like, not that he gets bored with it. I don't know if that's fair to say, but maybe they don't realize just the time that they need to put in, that it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And, there's not time. I mean, Jeter seems like a guy who'd be perfectly fine with it. But, if he ever got bored with it, I feel like these guys can very easily just, based on their mindset and how they train themselves, that they could just walk away at a moment's notice.
Well, that's why, I give Derek Jeter a lot of credit for something that a lot of other people don't realize, is that, when he stopped playing baseball and he had, hundreds of millions of dollars in his pocket or his bank account, he could have done anything. He could have done nothing for the rest of his life. He could have been a consultant, kind of a, little part-time, feel-good position with the Yankees. He could have done TV. He could have done any of those things that were easy. He chose the hardest thing there was to do. He put his money in the Marlins. He took control of the day-to-day operations of the Marlins. And for the first time in his life, he's subjected himself to a lot of criticism and a lot of second-guessing for the moves that he's made. And he's made mistakes, and I think he's learned from them. And right now, he's dealing with this situation with the COVID-19 outbreak. So and from what I understand, I know people written about people who work for him. He's very hands-on. He's the first one to work in the morning and the last one to leave. This is something he really wanted to do from the time he was in the middle of his playing career, and he's doing it. But he's putting the time in. A lot of guys don't. Same thing is true with coaching, Steve. A lot of former players want to stay in the game, but they don't necessarily want to put in the time that it takes to be a hitting coach or a pitching coach today. It used to be, hey, you were an old teammate of the managers, you could be a coach and you're basically a cheerleader. Today it's a lot more complicated. Ownership, executive roles, very complicated. And yeah, I wonder if Alex wouldn't get bored with it after 4 or 5 years. Whereas I think Jeter's going to do it until he's successful, because that's just kind of the way he's wired.
John, your thoughts on that?
Well, it is true. It does take a tremendous amount of time. That's why a lot of major superstar players weren't very good managers. I mean, there's so many examples of great players that decided to turn to managing for whatever reason and weren't very successful. I guess you could probably put Ted Williams on top of that list. His time with Washington Senators was so unsuccessful and so unhappy for him, I think. And even Magic, you saw what Magic Johnson did with the Lakers. He really wasn't a great coach. And being a superstar athlete doesn't necessarily make you capable of leading a group of men. I mean, some of the greatest managers and coaches of our time were men and women who really weren't very successful athletes, who just learned the game from a very different vantage point. And people like Miller Huggins, who was studied law at the University of Cincinnati, turned into the manager of the greatest Yankees team ever. And so many examples of that, of backup catchers that grow into great managers. So it's very unusual for a guy like Jeter, who made his name as a Hall of Fame player, to have a success, or to be able to have enough confidence in himself to pursue success at that level.
Dom's got a story. Go ahead, Dom.
Well, I was going to say, facts like John just dropped on Miller Huggins. More interesting facts can be found right here in Franchise on the Rise, available wherever fine books are sold, and of course written by yours truly, forward by John Stern. Go ahead. Shameless
I
plug.
put it up. No, it was perfect timing. I love it. You've got a story we're going to close on here in a few minutes. But I wanted to get your thoughts if you saw last night's highlights. And I've maybe you both can tell me to stop doing this, but you get up in the middle of the night, you get onto your phone, you start looking at stuff, and so I'm looking at all the video of Joe Kelly, and I'm looking at the Dodgers and Astros. None of it was surprising. The biggest thing I took from last night's video is the fact that I felt like Alex Bregman, as he was going down to first base, after he took a fastball behind the back on a 3-0 pitches, the reality set in almost. Watching his reaction was, holy cow, this is going to happen for the remainder of this season. And this is probably, and he just, I think the reality set in, for me at least, of I'm just going to keep getting thrown at. These guys are just going to keep throwing at me right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they knew it was coming. I was kind of wondering myself whether it was going to happen right away, in game one, and, who would be the Dodger pitcher that seeked revenge against the Astros. It's so, Steve, it's kind of interesting. They seem to be focusing on Bregman. I would think it would be Altuve, that would be the center of everyone's attention for so many other reasons. But Al Bregman seems to be the guy that everybody seems to want to bash in the butt, with a pitch. But I wish they had thrown some punches. That would have been really good. I mean, it was sort of diffused very quickly, but they're gonna. You're right, Steve. It's going to happen the whole year. It might even happen next year when the fans come back into play, and they'll have to live that whole experience as well. But too bad for the Astros. So sad.
Well, yeah, Bregman, I think, would be a target even in any event because he talks too much, and a lot of players, I think he rubs the wrong way with some of the things he says, puts on social media. But yeah, I think you're right. It's going to be worse than it would have been otherwise, because I think a lot of teams figure with the rules, the protocols that really forbid on the field brawls and any kind of contact. A lot of pitchers probably figure they're going to get a free shot, that they could hit somebody and they can't really come out and charge the mound or do anything like that. I imagine that there'll be some discipline, a little harsher on Joe Kelly than there might have been otherwise. But it's going to be a long period for the Astros to get over this, until stuff comes out about other teams doing the same thing, which you might very well see.
And somebody last night, I forget who it was, and I hate not being able to give them the credit for it. And they may not have been the first one, but Joe Kelly is going to get probably more of a fine, more of a suspension than any of the Astros who were able to partake in the cheating over the years. That's got everyone up in arms. Were either one of you surprised that sometimes there's pitchers that play the cop role, the policeman, and there last night it was Joe Kelly who said, you know what? I've got a long-term memory, and I'm going to be the guy who is part of this, and I'm going to make sure that that I'm going to remember.
Yeah, I was surprised it was Joe Kelly. You figure maybe Bueller or Ross Stripling or one of the lesser-known relievers. I knew it was going to come from somebody. I didn't think it was going to come from Kershaw. I don't think Kershaw would be the guy to exact the revenge, but I thought it might have been one of their other starting pitchers more than Joe Kelly.
Yeah, I think Kelly's personality is kind of combative. To me, he's one of the more logical, people to do it. I think you're probably guys like that on every team that you could actually picture being the combative guy to do it. And I think he's got that intimidating fastball. He's wild. He would probably be the most likely guy to be able to do it and claim that he just got away from him.
Wasn't he the guy that shook hands with Derek Jeter at second base, the Yankee Red Sox game? Wasn't Joe Kelly Derek Jeter have an interesting.
I don't remember that. It could be. Okay. I don't remember.
John, my final one for you, and I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think about it, is simply, are we going to have a World Series? And I'll even let you throw two teams in there. But I want to get Dom's thoughts on our president has decided, and this is from me, if you get upset with anything, our president has let us know that he's not going to throw a ceremonial first pitch at Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. It was news that he was even invited by his staff and by the Yankees organization as well. Dom, you've got some history with guys who weren't necessarily invited, but turned down an invite nonetheless.
Well, in April of 2004, following UConn's second NCAA championship, Jim Calhoun threw out the first pitch at Fenway Park, and afterward, and he was in his glory because he was from Boston, had been a Red Sox fan for most of his life. Braves moved away, and he'd actually pitched at Fenway Park in American Legion. So he had the writers around him, a lot of New York baseball writers around him. He was really in his glory, and he was talking about how the Yankees had asked him to come and throw out the first ball in New York, but he would never do that. He despised the Yankees all his life. He couldn't possibly bring himself to do that, and he had a nice chat with Brian Cashman, but he politely turned him. And they called him back. They didn't believe he said no, and he turned him down again. And well, this was all written up, particularly in the New York Times. I believe George Vesey did a long column about this, about how loyal Calhoun was to the Red Sox, and he turned the Yankees down twice because he couldn't set foot on the field at Yankee Stadium. Well, when George Steinbrenner saw this, he hit the ceiling. He wanted to know who invited him and what had happened and how this guy had made the Yankees look so bad. And the Yankees then claimed that they never invited him, that no one had ever invited him. And I was covering the Yankees at that time. I knew to be skeptical of anything they said, so I really thought they were full of it. But I went and asked people at UConn, can you tell me who made the call, who invited him? And they couldn't, because Jim, if you know Jim Calhoun, he has a gift for Blarney, a reputation for tall tales. And for the best I could figure out, some intermediary who had contacts at both UConn and the Yankees had broached this to Calhoun, but he'd never actually been officially invited by the Yankees. But anyway, the Yankees put out statements, and what happened this week. Not to be political, this is just a fun baseball story. But if you know the Yankees and George Steinbrenner and Jim Calhoun, what happened this week kind of reminded me of that, and I just kind of got a chuckle out of it. Kind of a history repeating itself.
Love it, Dom. Thanks so much, John. Give us some good news. Is there going to be October baseball?
I think as long as we can avoid one or two or three other teams being affected by the virus. I mean, if we get to the point where the Marlins are joined in this proliferation of the illness by two or three other teams, and continuing the season becomes logistically impossible. You look at what they're doing with the Marlins now, where they're not playing, through the end of the week. And if they get into a situation where there's two or three other teams that are put in the same situation, then that sort of has an effect on other teams, and other teams missing games, and rescheduling games becomes impossible. They may not have any other choice but to just shut the game down, because the process of even getting to the point where they can create a champion, the process of finishing the regular season and having a productive postseason might become just too logistically impossible for them to conduct. I'm going to hope that this is an isolated situation, that we can get through the next 4 to 6 weeks, everybody is well, and then we can get to the end of the road and the process, and that we do have a World Series. Now, in terms of who might win that World Series, I know a lot of people are talking about the Yankees and the Red Sox. That seems like it might be the most interesting pick, but I don't know. I think in the American League, I kind of like the Minnesota Twins or the Oakland A's or a team like that. I maybe sneak in and really contest for the championship. And on the National League level, I think that the Dodgers are a good pick. I don't think anybody in the NL East might contest to win the championship, but I'm hoping that this just turns into a really bizarre, beautiful, wonderful, unexpected season. And why can't the Padres win the World Series, Steve?
There you go, with those beautiful uniforms that they're wearing here in 2020. Dom, John, thank you so much. I truly enjoyed this. I know I said about 25 minutes or so. We went a little longer. Dom, I know you got to get going. But thank you so much. I would love to do this again down the road, and continued health to you guys and your families as well.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Anytime. And keep an eye on the White Sox if you're looking for a sleeper team.
There we go. Thank you, gentlemen. Enjoy the day.
Thank you, Steve.
Dominic Amore, Hartford Current, John Altavilla. I've met both men now, and living here on the shoreline in Connecticut. It was interesting because John came in. We share the same barber, Ron at Top Notch Haircutters here in Connecticut, and got to know him, and he's been great with his time, and have struck up a nice little friendship with him. And he's one of the first guys I'll be hitting a lunch with here as soon as we can. And Dom also goes to the same barbershop, Top Notch, here in Brantford, Connecticut, as well. And both tremendous writers. Dom did a plug for his book. We do as well. And it's a great read, and encourage you to take a look at that. Appreciate it. Tomorrow, Thursday, and we're going to chat with I broke into the minor leagues in 1997 out of college with the Batavia Clippers, and Greg Legg was the manager of that Batavia team that made it all the way to the New York Penn League Championship. We're going to talk with Legger on Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. We continue to build our audience. We continue to build our followers on our Lennox on Baseball Facebook page. Again, if you enjoy what we're doing here, if you have any ideas for future guests, we're going to have a couple next week. I'll share with that on Thursday that are Yankee related, as well as we come up on another anniversary of Thurman Munson's passing, our early August of 1979. Thanks for tuning in to the Lennox on Baseball live stream podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody.